Okay, lesson 21, microeconomics, and we're looking at ways in which we can reduce pollution. There are three ways in which we can reduce pollution. In this session, we can use regulation, we can use property rights, or we can use pollution permits. Right, the first one there is the extension of property rights, and for instance, if you have a river flowing through a town and a chemical firm producing negative externalities, the owners of that river could sue the firm if they polluted the river. So therefore, the river can make sure that they took into account the negative externalities, and if they did that, then output would fall from from 0A or OA to OB. They would reduce output, so there'd be less pollution, and we would move to a point where MSB was equal to MSC. In technical terms, we call that internalizing the externality. So if we extend property rights, then we can ensure that firms would reduce pollution. So for example, if someone owns the oceans, and if the ocean's been polluted, then they can get hold of that firm and say, look, if you carry on polluting us, then we want compensation. The only problem I have with it slightly is that the sea will still get polluted. It may be very good for the people who own the oceans, because they'll be able to make money out of it, but what about everybody else who wants to swim in the sea? So this is never actually mentioned in the books, but I'm just sort of thinking to myself, well, there is a weakness to that argument, is in fact that the pollution is still going to exist. I agree that there may be less of it, or it may pay the firm to stop polluting, so that may also happen. Right. There's also another argument throughout the world that we in the first world could pay the people who live in the third world, we could pay them to make sure that they didn't cut down trees. So that would help in terms of global warming in that case. So we could try and extend property rights. The other way in which we can do it is to use pollution permits, which is a way of working in the market system. And I'll just give you a technical example here. The government will set a limit on the amount of pollution, and then each firm will be allocated permits, and they could pollute up to that level. Now let's assume that there are two firms, firm A, firm B. Firm A is within its level, so it doesn't need to reduce its pollution level. However, if it did want to reduce its pollution, it would cost it £10 million to reduce their pollution level by 500 tonnes. Firm B is beyond its pollution level, and it has to reduce its pollution level by 500 tonnes, and to do that it would cost firm B 25 million quid. So obviously the ideal situation is that firm A pays £10 million, reduces its pollution level. They will then go to firm B, and they would charge them £22 million for the fact that then firm B could buy firm A's permit. So firm B will buy firm A's permit, and it pays 22 million quid. So overall, firm B will save £3 million, and firm A will make 12 million quid. So overall, society would save 15 million pounds. So this is the workings of the free market, and it's paying the firm which is more efficient at reducing its pollution level. Just give you a very, very radical one here, is that everybody in a country should have an individual permit. Now, I suppose you would have to have a lot of technology to monitor this. However, if you own a Porsche and you are polluting the environment more than the average person, and you have one of those massive, great big fridges, and you've got a massive house that uses a lot of electricity, and so therefore you're giving out a lot of carbon emissions, you would then have to go and buy permits of someone who has no cars and who likes cycling every day long and has renewable technology spattered all over their house. So then you would have to then go and buy the permit of that individual. So you'd be transferring money from those who do pollute the environment to those who pollute the environment less. And over time you could reduce the level of pollution that's allowed, so it'd make it tougher, so therefore people would have to adapt to the changes in the pollution levels, and therefore they would have to bring in new technologies to get over the problem. So we've got two ways of reducing pollution here: extending the property rights and using pollution permits. This here is a free market solution. Tackling the problem here of pollution, and this is the last one here, which is regulation. So we've just looked at property rights, pollution permits, taxes, subsidies. You can also be used. You can run an information campaign to stop it, and this is the last one that we're doing. Now in this case, in terms of regulation, what the government can do is it can just set a legal limit, and the legal limit will take place where MSC is equal to MSB, and that is also where you're going to maximise your welfare. The problem with it is, of course, is that we have to implement a value judgment to say how big that negative externality is. Okay, I've just drawn this one on here, and this is where the MSC cannot equal the MSB, as shown by that on there. And in this case, of course, then the government would have to ban the industry because it pollutes too heavily. Now, the problem with doing that is, of course, is lots of firms are going to lose their jobs, and there's going to be a great big outcry. In relation to China, who some people accuse of having protectionism, because obviously China has much lower, not obviously, but China has much lower regulations in terms of the environment. So it may well be the case that they're still polluting the environment heavily, and that adds to global warming, and that has a negative effect on the third party, which is China, the Chinese population, but also the rest of the world. How do you combat that? Well, obviously this is the problem with climate change. You need a great big global agreement to try and tackle the problem with climate change. And finally, just an interesting one here, we've got the Kuznets curve over here, and this basically says as GDP increases, we may well be able to reduce pollution. And in fact, the UK may just be coming down the top of this curve here. However, the problem is we maybe got China and India here, and they're still industrialising. Their regulations are not as strong, and it's going to take them a long time to get to this point. And during that time, there will be a lot of pollution, and if you believe the Stern Review, then GDP is going to take a 20% hit at some stage. The only way of getting around that problem is for those advanced nations or more advanced nations to transfer their technology, the latest technology, to these countries, and so these countries will make a quick dart over there. But that needs a global agreement. Okay.